Alright, hello and welcome back. This week we had an album called The Impossible Kid by Aesop Rock, not to be confused with Aesop Rocky, another hip-hop artist with a very similar name. For whatever reason, I'm pretty sure this coincidence has been noted a number of times before. I'd heard of both of them already before this popped up, given the album we had to listen to. But knew nothing about either of them other than the fact that obviously they're both, I guess, rappers, you could say. But anyway, so yeah, it's a hip hop album, and now hip hop is maybe the genre I've experimented with the least, at least by my own ear, I guess it would be. Not listened to much of it at all. I have a handful of songs in my big playlist. That would be Gratitude by the Beastie Boys and The King of Rock by Run DMC. It's just completely arbitrary and definitely not like necessarily the best of the genre. As far as an album context goes, maybe even fewer. So I guess the big one is To Pimp a Butterfly. I have heard not too long ago, a couple of months ago, I guess. That was as a request from my brother, who I guess is more of a hip hop fan than I am. So, and yeah, I thought that album was outstanding. Really, I had nothing to compare it to, really, but the commentaries were great on it. The further I went in, the more I enjoyed it. I would call it, I guess, a slow burn, you would call it. But my brother actually hasn't returned the favor, because I asked him to listen to Geo Gaddy by Boards of Canada, and he still hasn't done that. So, oh well. And of course, earlier on in this cycle, we had Bottomless Pit by Death Grips. I don't know if you could really compare that to an album like this, though. I mean, it's very experimental or industrial. Honestly, it was more of its own sort of genre than just straight up hip hop. And if I really wanted to clutch at straws, I guess I could maybe classify some of these late, like Benji and Beyond, Sun Kil Moon's album as hip hop, but that's kind of ludicrous. But all in all, I would say I don't really feel qualified to give a very informed opinion about an album like this, or really any hip hop album. So take anything I say as more of an outsider's perspective. So let's actually talk about the album itself. I'm going in with pretty solid expectations, because although I don't listen to hip hop albums at all, doesn't mean I don't like the genre. In fact, the one major instance of listening to a hip hop album I give it on a 9 out of 10. So it doesn't mean I don't like the genre in any way, shape or form. All it means is that I have no particular urge to listen to it for whatever reason. And to be very general, I'll say all the backings are really nice. There's not too much you need to say when talking about stuff like this. I mean, for me, it reminded me of perhaps the golden age hip hop, like 90s through to 2000s, as I say. I don't know too much about it, but that's what it reminded me of. Sort of stuff you might hear on like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, I don't know. Although he is actually mentioned in the lyrics on one of the songs on this album too. And so I'm listening to this album very passively. You know, I'm just on Forza listening to it, as I do with pretty much every album I listen to. But I'm not necessarily listening too hard. But the thing is with hip hop, I guess in general, but at least with this album, the lyrics, they'll draw you in without you realizing, and you'll just randomly take stuff away without concentrating, like these stories of his little brother not being able to go to a Ministry concert, or him just regular social interactions in his ice cream shop, and then stuff like that sort of drew me in and allowed me to visualize the stories he was telling. And perhaps that's sort of the draw with hip hop for some people. It's almost like listening to a podcast, but in musical form. Maybe that comparison isn't too apt, but that's just something I thought of while I was listening to it, because the number of stories he tells, each track has another story. It just reminded me of it. I think maybe the album has too many tracks. Like we have 15 tracks over 50 minutes here, and towards the end I was sort of thinking, oh, this must be the last song, and then there was another one, and then eventually, it just kept going on. Not that that's a bad thing if the lyrical content is good. And of course, I'd mentioned it earlier, maybe it's a bit hypocritical. We've got these Sun Kill Moon albums, which is like 2 hours of rambling, and that kept me interesting, so I suppose I shouldn't really say that the album is too long, because it isn't. For whatever reason, I was expecting this album to maybe be a bit more abstract or experimental. I don't know where I got that from. I mean, listening to this, I wouldn't necessarily call it all that experimental. It sounded good, but nothing out of the ordinary, so I wouldn't say that was a plus or a negative, just something I wanted to throw out there. And in terms of the individual tracks, I would say the most notable or memorable to me was, I think it was called, Blood Sandwich. It's the one I mentioned earlier with the Ministry concert and all that, but it's about his brothers, and as far as I could tell, and obviously that's relatable for me. Okay, that's more or less all I had to say. I was originally not going to make a video because I felt like I had nothing to say and I wasn't qualified. But I managed to scrape together enough thoughts to at least say something here, and hopefully what I'm saying isn't complete nonsense. Alright, let's end it with the questions. So, another album from this year that I think is good. A very difficult year for me, 2016. I barely listened to anything from it, so I'm assuming my favourite album from this year I'm yet to hear. But as far as stuff that I've actually listened to, I'll go with something that isn't a cop-out, because I said KO last time. I'm not going to say them again. And I already mentioned Dissociation. So I'll go with Horse Jumper of Love, self-titled. It's only about half an hour or something, but it's just a nice, sort of like slowcore indie rock kind of album. I liked it anyway. So check that out if you're into that sort of thing, I suppose. Myself, I've only listened to it once, but as I say, this is a difficult year. I'm really scraping. And the big question, of course, is the Impossible Kid a one and done? Well, if I were to just listen to hip hop again, if I decided I was going to try an album, I wouldn't just put this album back on. I would definitely go and try to listen to something else, because my exposure to the genre is so limited in terms of albums anyway. But if I were more familiar with the genre, yeah, I see no reason why I wouldn't listen to this again. And that will be that for this episode. So I'll see you guys next time.